that I realized that you had to do something that you really put everything into, and that you need to gain expertise in. And the revelation for me was the revelation that was going to be acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and that this was the thing I was really going to put everything into, especially since it was costing me so much in terms of time and in terms of money and work to get the training. So this was it. This was, it's called gong fu, of course, isn't it, in Chinese? It means the work you have to put into anything that makes you a proper professional at it.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. My grandfather was a frugal man. He spent his early years living in a sod house on the prairie, started a business at the beginning of the Depression. He was, rightly so, attentive to the resources that he had. As a kid, I remember his garage was full of well-ordered jars of bolts, screws, nuts, cotter pins, and washers. He never needed to go to the hardware store. He wasted nothing and had a system for organizing and storing the bits and bolts that fastened things together, both stored in little jars and in the habits and outlooks on life. He was frugal, but that did not make him stingy. He liked nice cars, and he drove them. He loved to travel, and he did. He had enough that some would spill into our pockets as children in small ways that taught us that money could be a magical medium of trade, and it was not in endless supply. I've had patients who lived through similar circumstances, and sometimes they still hold their resources close, but they don't use them for enjoyment. There are others who rack up debt because they refuse to live within the means that they have. Something Chinese medicine teaches us is that it's the balance that is important. Too much acquiring prevents us from enjoying the fruits of our efforts. Too much spending of resources, it creates a depletion as we're always empty and hungry like a ghost. The Tai-Yin Yangming quartet of organs speaks to this. We have the Yangming organs that extract nutrition and the Tai-Yin organs that use those nutritive essences to distribute into our structure and physicality. We talk about how the Fu extract and the Zang store, that there is movement and quietude, that both are needed for health and well-being. Striking a balance, it is a ceaselessly dynamic process. Storing just enough to have ample supply and expending enough to keep a flow going. Too often, I imagine harmony as an unchanging balance, like an old set of scales would balance in stillness one side with the other, but actually, that is the definition of stasis. Balance, it's actually dynamic and constantly changing. In looking back, I think my grandfather was a bit of a Taoist in how he struck balance. I have some regret that I did not have the eyes to see it when I was a younger man. Some lessons, they really do take decades to ripen. History for sure shapes us, both our own personal stories and the lived experiences of those who are influential in our lives. Not surprisingly, anyone there in the early days of acupuncture's emergence into the West was doing something else when acupuncture first got their attention. I suspect it took similar measures of curiosity and courage to start down that path of learning, along with an inclination to wander off the well-tread road. Charlie Buck was interested in neurophysiology when a teacher shared his opinion that acupuncture would be the forefront of that field in the future. That, along with his interest in Eastern philosophy, set him off on seeing if that might indeed be the case. There is a lot that has changed in the profession between then and now. We'll explore all of that right after a word from the people and companies that you can thank for making Qiological possible. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AcuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Charlie Bach, welcome back to Qiological.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be back.
Wonderful to have you here. This is part of an ongoing history series. This is something I started in August of 2023. I thought I'd just do a few history conversations with some folks that were there in the early days. But I got to tell you, the more I talk to folks, the more fascinating this whole topic becomes. And I realize there is so much to our profession, especially from the early days, that most of us don't know about. And you were there. You were one of the early folks. I'm curious. I want to have us jump in the Wayback Machine for a moment, go back to the time when you were a younger man without white hair, probably a lot more of it as well.
Yes.
And I want to know what was going on in your life, what was going on in the world, what were the issues of the day, what were you fighting against, what were you worried about? Paint me a picture of Charlie Buck back when you first heard about acupuncture.
You're right. You're giving me a chance to talk about me here. And I hope you've got a stop button in case it goes on too much. I was always going to be a scientist from a very young age, and particularly interested in medicine. But then in about 1968, my hair started to grow, and we had the kind of hippie movement. We had the Summer of Love. We had all that stuff. We had Jimi Hendrix. And so I somehow wanted to incorporate that. So I started reading up on. You had to pick a guru, but I didn't go for the bearded Indian ones. I settled on Zen and on Buddhism and on Taoism in a sort of teenager way. And so I managed to square those two. So I read books like Fritjof Capra's Tao of Physics, if you ever came across that.
I read that book. I read it later when I was in college. I didn't realize it came out that early. Tao of Physics in the late 60s.
Yeah. I think I was about no. I think it was a year or two after that. I've already moved on from the late 60s. My hair grew. I think I got to about 15, 16 and discovered the I Ching and the Tao of Physics, and I read Alan Watts's Way of Zen and these things. So I carried on with the science thing and went to medical school to study human physiology. And at the end of that, I did a brain research project that actually, looking back, I realize now it was an acupuncture project, because I was taking rats and I was taking the tops off their heads. I had a research license from the government to do animal research. And I was stimulating kidney 1 on these rats whilst recording what are called evoked potentials from the rat cerebellum and its brain.
Oh my goodness. Now, did you realize that you were stimulating kidney 1, or you just thought, okay, I'm going to stimulate one place and see what happens?
No, I've never heard of kidney 1. I'd never heard of kidney 1, but it was going in the bottom of its feet, and we were doing electrical stimulation and recording responses. But at that time, I mean, bear in mind, I was a pretend Buddhist. At this time, I kind of imagined myself, and as you can imagine, there's a slight friction between the idea of doing neurophysiological research and being a Buddhist, and we were beginning to get animal rights protesters outside the medical school, and so I started to wrestle with this problem. At one point, I asked my supervisor what he thought was the most interesting new area of neurophysiology coming up, and he said, "Oh, acupuncture, definitely." And this was 1976, 1977. And that was a very strange word to use. Hardly anybody knew what it meant. And I certainly didn't have much of an idea. It was a woo-woo, strange woo word. And for this to come out of the mouth of a university medical school professor made it even more curious. And so, of course, I later found out that he was referring to the research earlier in the 70s into acupuncture as a stimulation for endorphins. And so the endorphin research started in about 1970, because people wondered what acupuncture was doing. And there was a professor in Beijing who published research that showed something was being released in response to acupuncture. And there was a race in science to try and find out what it was. And the first endorphins were discovered in about 1971, I think.
That's so interesting how these things co-evolve, because I think that's around the same time, or maybe even just before, Candace Pert was doing all her research on finding what is this endogenous opioid that seems to be excreted by the body.
Yeah, well, it was a mystery at first, and of course the reason he was interested. I mean, universities even in those days were largely about getting funds in, getting money, and so really, I think what he meant in retrospect, with my brain as it is now, he was thinking, well, there's research funds for doing that. There was a lot of research funding, especially in America, which was supporting research into acupuncture, and of course that keyed in with the Nixon visit to China, going behind the bamboo curtain in about 1971, I think that was. So already the spotlight was on this strange thing called acupuncture.
That's so interesting that here you are, you're this budding Buddhist, you're doing animal research. So it's fascinating just what contradictory characters we can be, And your professor says, "Oh, the most interesting thing, well, acupuncture." Like, what a weird, mind-blowing thing.
Yeah, it was mind blowing to me. But I decided that I didn't want to follow a standard career in neurophysiology, because by definition you need live animals to work on. And so, being a pretend Buddhist, I thought in my naive way that what I wanted to do was go to Tibet, onto the Tibetan plateau, which again is a half-baked thing, really. And you couldn't really go to Tibet at that time. So I found out that you could walk across the Himalayas or Himalayas in Nepal and get onto the Tibetan plateau there. And it was a quest, shall we say. And it was there, going through those villages, Shangri-La villages in Nepal, that were very remote and had got no medical facilities, that I was very warmly welcomed by these villagers and fed and given somewhere to sleep and what have you. And then they would say, "Oh, please, could you have a look at my mother? She's not well." Or and they kind of hoped that I was medically qualified. And so I'd look at these people and I'd think, well, yeah, if we had diagnostic facilities, if we had the pharmacological range of things, then even you might be able to do something. But even the best real doctor would struggle to do anything in these situations. There was dysentery, there was hepatitis, there was somebody with a tooth abscess, and that's the point where I thought, if acupuncture works, then the tools are in your hands. It would be so much easier. So that was really what triggered me starting to look into acupuncture. That memory of being told that this was an interesting thing, my knowledge and interest in Oriental stuff and the I Ching and what have you. So I then started to look into it. I got to New Delhi and I went around all bookshops trying to find a book on acupuncture, and eventually found one. In Bombay, or Mumbai as it's called now, I found a book by Manaka on Japanese acupuncture. So I read that.
You found a Monica book in English?
In English, in Shanghai in 1979. I think that would be, or 1980.
Shanghai or Bombay?
Sorry, no, did I say Shanghai? Yeah, sorry, Mumbai. I found a book on by Manaka.
From Monica. What year is this?
I think that would be 1980.
That's crazy. That's wild.
I don't know. It was just random. Maybe it was meant to be or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, a little bit unusual. I know a lot of people were looking for books at that stage. Well, not a lot of people. A few people. Like, what the hell's acupuncture kind of people? There are very few books, and yet you find something in English from Monica. Okay.
Yeah. And the one I bought in New Delhi was a book by Felix Mann, Acupuncture, Cure of Many Diseases or something. So when I got back from my sojourn in India and Nepal, I then went on a quest to find out as much as I could about acupuncture. So I went into a big academic bookshop and said, "Get me every single book there is on acupuncture," which you could say in those days. I think there were about 5. And so I read those. As a scientist, I had reservations because there were 3-year degree courses in acupuncture. Well, they weren't recognized as degrees at that time, but there were degree level courses for 3 years, which was expensive. So I was a little bit cautious about that. Then I discovered that in London there was an acupuncture store, an acupuncture shop. And it was behind Euston Station on Eversalt Street. And it was like going back to the old curiosity shop or something. It was, I remember you walked in the door and there was a bell on a coil of metal. You know, those bells that go ding. And I remember there was green fluorescent tubes on the ceiling, and there was worn linoleum on the floor. And there was a strange Chinese man sitting behind a glass case, and a completely empty shop with nobody in it. And it was always very strange. I was stepping into a strange world. I remember in the glass case, he'd got one of those Mar rollers, you know, the things with spikes on that looks like a sadomasochist tool. And I looked at that. I thought, oh, I'm going into a strange world here. But he had got some books. He got about 10 books, and one of those books was a summary of research, 500 research papers from China. And this was neurophysiology. A lot of them, there were clinical studies, there were neurophysiological studies. And I picked this up and I thought, oh my God, there's some real neurophysiology here. And so I bought that and read that. And that was the clincher for me, because it wasn't just woo-woo. It was something solid. I thought, this is something real happening here. So I signed up with.
Wow, that's incredible. I remember when I was getting curious about acupuncture, and my current acupuncturist at that time said, "Oh, read The Web That Has No Weaver." This is in the early 90s. Of course, that book existed, so I couldn't. I remember reading it and thinking, I don't understand a damn thing they're saying. And what I think I do understand, it just sounds weird. Like, how do you parse this way of thinking with doing anything useful? It was so bizarre to me. I could not wrap my mind around it. So that was quite an extraordinary bit of luck on your part, that you happened to wander into ye old Oriental medicine curiosity shop. And this guy's got sadomasochism tools and on acupuncture research.
Yeah, he then became Mr. Big as an acupuncture supplier. He had a great big shop, 10 years later, double fronted shop with a clinic and hundreds of books and all sorts of stuff. He became quite well known.
He was also an acupuncturist?
No, he was a businessman.
Okay.
But he became quite an important figure, really, in the acupuncture Chinese medicine world later on.
So other people besides you found out about him, and he parlayed that into a business opportunity to provide books and learning materials and probably supplies as well.
Yeah, things grew enormously through the late 80s, through the 90s. This whole world of Chinese medicine and acupuncture exploded, really, in the UK and in America.
Who was this guy? What was the name of that store?
His name was Benny. I can't remember his second name. He was Chinese. Everybody called him Benny. I think he died about 4 or 5 years ago. His shop is still there. It's still on the high street. So that was it. So I was then determined to go and study this properly. And of course, you don't know anything. If you've just parachuted in to a subject like this, you really don't know the landscape. You don't know where you are. At the time, there were 3 acupuncture training colleges on offer, one of which didn't reply to my letter when I wrote to them. The other one was Worsley's College, and then there was Van Buren's College in East Grinstead, the International College of Oriental Medicine. And so I looked at the two, and it looked to me like the number of hours of training you got was more than double for Van Buren's College. So I thought, well, the fees are about the same, so I'll go to that one. That was the basis of my decision, really, on that.
Okay. You're going to get more for your money.
Yeah. I didn't have any money, actually.
So you wanted to spend it well.
I had nothing. I was ready. It was near the Ashdown Forest that Van Buren's College was, and I was ready to live in a tent in the forest while studying. I was young and foolish, but I was really, if something didn't turn up, I was ready to camp and live as a wild person.
Yes. What at that moment, Charlie, as you're preparing to launch yourself into learning, what did you imagine you were going to be able to do with that? What did you imagine? It's like, what kind of problem did you imagine acupuncture was going to solve?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that I really thought about it. I just think that I didn't. I just wanted to marry up my knowledge of medicine and my science knowledge and my love of the Chinese thinking and Chinese traditions, and that I think was the motivating factor. I don't think it passed through my mind at all, and I think this happens a lot, even now with acupuncturists, is that they forget that when they get out in the world, they're also going to have to be businessmen. And I don't think anybody, certainly in my day, and very few in the modern world, actually realize that. So some drop off quite soon because they realize that they've got to sell themselves, they've got to actually run a business and be successful. So I wasn't really thinking about who I was going to treat. I wasn't thinking about what I was going to treat. I wasn't really thinking about how I was going to make a living and survive. It's a gamble.
You were in your early 20s, I suppose, yes?
I was mid 20s, yeah.
Mid 20s, yeah. That I was going to say that sounds about right. I remember the things that I was doing around those ages, and it was nothing about how it's going to benefit future me other than this is interesting and I don't want to waste my time on something that isn't. It was later when I got into my 30s that I was concerned, oh, can I make a living? I mean, when I went to acupuncture, when I went to study it, I was in my 30s. And there was an actual career path. And it's a good thing because in your 30s, you want to make sure that you're going from some kind of stability to some kind of stability. But in your 20s, you get a free pass on that stuff. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that when we're young, we don't always realize how the way you get good at things is by putting a lot of work into it. So I did science and didn't really put the full amount of effort into it or concentration into it. I also fancied myself as a musician from an early age, and I just imagined, as the arrogant young men do, that I was really good already just by talent. And so I never really did the work. And it was only as I got towards my mid 20s that I realized that you had to do something that you really put everything into, and that you need to gain expertise in. And so the revelation for me was the revelation that was going to be acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and that this was the thing I was really going to put everything into, especially since it was costing me so much in terms of time and in terms of money and work to get the training. So this was it. This was, it's called gong fu, of course, isn't it, in Chinese? It means the work you have to put in to anything that makes you a proper professional at it. So really, the inspiration was that I decided that this was the thing that I was going to do and do my best at. And I've been outclassed by lots of other people since, but that doesn't matter really. We were talking before about Volker, for example, and the amazing things that he's achieved. So I haven't got as far as I might have done, but still, I do other things.
It's an interesting thing to say. I haven't gotten as far as I might have gone. I always tend to add a question after that of by whose measure, according to whom.
Well, true.
One of the really interesting things about East Asian medicine is it's actually a fairly simple set of principles when you think about it that give rise to an incredible multitude of practices, of perspectives, of ways of working. And it so much is a piece of, I'm going to say, what the medicine is. Again, some fundamental principles and who we happen to be. And then you mix that stuff together and you got something interesting to work with for like every dang day of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is, I mean, in a sense, we don't always know at the beginning how important what you've just said is. That actually, when I was doing a lot of teaching, I tried to propose to the college that at the end of the 3-year acupuncture training, that the final weekend should be returning to the basic principles that everybody skipped over so early in the first few weeks, because people, I think when you're a student and you go, oh, yin yang, yeah, I've got that, yeah, the 5 elements, yeah, meridians, channels, da, 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 and you all go, oh, that's so easy, I've got that already. And of course, you haven't necessarily got it just because you've heard it. It's not in your bones. So I wanted to go back. I wanted to do a lecture where we would go back and we say, right, let's talk about yin and yang. Let's talk about excess and deficiency, and actually do it at a level that would make people go, oh my God, I didn't quite see that way.
Yes, there it is. That might not be a bad practice every now and then. Just come right back and take that introductory lecture one more time.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Bob Flores said. One of his famous sayings was, what did he say? He said, mastery in Chinese medicine is about mastery of the basics. It's really about mastery, having in your bones those very fundamental principles. And that's, I think, very true.
That's been my experience as well. I would certainly underscore that. And it makes me think, too, this is funny. We're speaking here in the fall of 2023. This won't publish until sometime in 2024. But here in the fall of 2023, we've just seen the closing of The Lantern, fantastic magazine.
Yes.
Journal of Chinese Medicine, 20 years of publication. It's been a wonderful resource, and shout out to Steve Clavey and that whole crew, because, man, that's been a great traveling companion for me here at the beginning of my career. But one of the things that I found so endearing in a way, and it underscores what you just said, Charlie, one of the things that they did is they started with an editorial, because they always have an editorial, but the editorial that they used in the final edition of The Lantern is the editorial that they used in the first edition of The Lantern.
Okay.
And it's all about the tyranny of the microscope and how we look outside through so much, I'm going to say, conventional science, which is a useful model, but it's not the same model as Chinese science. And so, yeah, that return to something basic, that really hits the mark for me.
I think that's what Chinese medicine practitioners are supposed to be. I think we're supposed to have the fundamental principles running through our veins and in our bones, and that we manifest those. That what's the word? We play out those principles from inside, rather than just learning information and practicing it. Embody, that's the word, embody, the word I was looking for. In a sense, a good practitioner embodies the historical tradition without really just copying it. And thinking of Ted, can I tell this quick story? Thinking of Ted Kapchuk, he had a story when I was studying with him of Sun Si Miao. At the time, he was obsessed with Sun Si Miao. He was translating bits of Sun Si Miao. And I remember he told a story that he translated from Sun Si Miao, which was about when Sun Si Miao treated a peasant lady with a facial neuralgia or a facial tic. And he said that Sun Si Miao took her pulse and examined her, and then looked inside her eyes, eyelids, and then said, I know why you have this problem. You have this problem because, unbeknownst to you, an ant walked across your shadow in the sunshine, and it walked across the shadow of your face. And so she said, well, what am I supposed to do about that? And he said, well, come outside. And he sat her in the sunshine and took put her on a chair, and then got an ant and got the ant to walk the other way across her shadow. And in this way, he cured her. Now, the point about that is that there's a principle about Sun Si Miao's thinking, but we wouldn't write that down in a lecture and go, oh, yes, I've got a lady with facial paralysis. I'm going to tell her the ant story and then sit her outside, because he was using his understanding of that woman's culture, her cultural beliefs. He was using his power as a famous physician, and so many other things. And that's the point, is that there's a thinking there. And the Sun Si Miao famously once said, yi shi yi ye, medicine is a way of thinking. And really, that's what we're supposed to embody, I think, is the way of thinking that comes out of all those Han Dynasty principles that the founders of this medicine laid out.
I completely agree. And I have a lot of trouble doing that.
Yeah, well, it's a big challenge. Nobody can completely do that.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. It's a big challenge. Let me just run something by you for a second, because this is something I'm really chewing on. I so appreciate your story, because again, it's how do we take the principles without saying we're using the principles? How do we take and apply the principles in a way that someone can receive it based on who they are and how they are and what they need? We so often have these ways of talking about Chinese medicine. We talk about generals and we talk about emperors, emperors that they're so damn sensitive they can't deal with the outside world, so they sit in seclusion in benefit of their kingdom, right? We talk about things like this. And I get it that they're metaphors, they're pointing towards something else. But I find it very unhelpful in the modern day to take that kind of thing, pull out the gist of what it is, and then be able to speak it with my patients in their own language in that time. I find it tremendously challenging. I wonder if you have any advice for me or pointers or insight on that.
I do a 2-day seminar on this, and if you press the wrong button,
okay, I'll just be a shill for your seminar.
I think this has been a really major quest for me. People think that I must be a historian because I wrote a book on Chinese medicine history. I'm not a historian. I just wanted to try and understand the tradition better, and in particular, I wanted to understand the founding times of Chinese medicine and the cultural milieu that was happening then in the Warring States period, in the run up to the Han Dynasty. And to do that, I've read outside the normal confines of what people read. So there's scholarly investigations, for example, from the Warring States in modern times, looking at the Warring States period and looking at the way government worked and the way that wars were fought out. Obviously Sun Tzu, but there's a whole genre of textbooks looking at what they were doing, and these were the same people. This was the same mindset as the people who founded the medicine. So I found that really interesting. There was a group of people employed by the government who were called cloud watchers, the people who watched clouds. Now, obviously, the military historians take the mickey out of this somewhat. They say, oh, they were mad. They were just staring at clouds, and like astrology, they were looking at cloud formations or what have you. And I thought about this. Of course, in the Warring States period, there were massive wars going on all the time with 50, 100,000 or more soldiers, all cutting people, invading each other's countries. And if there was an army of 50,000 men encroaching on your territory, you wanted to get intelligence on how big they were, how many there were, and what they were doing. Now, having that many people for example, at meal times, all cooking food is going to create disturbances in the atmosphere. Now, supposing that army, it's mealtime and there's no disturbance in the atmosphere, what does that mean? It means they've run out of food.
They're not eating.
It means they've run out of food. Now, you can't have an army fight when they haven't eaten for 4 days. So it means that they're going to invade immediately afterwards. So, although this idea of cloud watchers at first sight looks like something a bit silly, actually, I think these people had real value in what they were doing. And what they were doing was extending their cognitive abilities to the absolute max. They were meditating, they were practicing seeing things in the dark, they were practicing high level perception using their ears, and that is the key. I think one of the keys to the business of understanding what Chinese medicine's originators were doing. And so all the people who admired, like Bian Chui, for example, was admired because he claimed he could look at people and diagnose them just by looking at them. And he claimed that he could see their internal organs functioning, but because of course, what he meant was that he could read it. He couldn't literally view people's livers or spleens, but what he meant was that he had enough penetrating cognitive skills that he'd worked on to be able to do that. So I think that it's getting inside the mind of the people of that time and not really just projecting in a superficial way what our modern world is about onto the tradition. So that's what I've tried to do. I've asked the question, what is mastery in Chinese medicine? How do people become masters? What should I have known right at the beginning? What would it have been how much more masterful would I be if I had understood then what I understand now about the process by which we develop our cognition to a high level, the way that we develop what the word people use is intuition as well, and I think that that's another interesting idea, that intuition is not something that we just have. I'm a very intuitive person, therefore I can diagnose just by looking at you or whatever. Intuition is only valuable when it's educated, when it's actually curated, when we have a mind that is curating information into us and having some kind of guard on the door of our minds, so that we critically evaluate information.
That's a really interesting word, Charlie. Curated. A curated mind, a curated perception, capacity, like you were just describing, to enhance our cognition, enhance our looking, enhance our hearing, perception. I mean, all that for sure fits in the clinic. Absolutely. I think I've just found over the years, entirely too often, I have shared with my patients I'm going to call it Chinese Medicine 101 story, but I find that to be incredibly not helpful to my patients. And it's actually not that helpful to me, because the real trick, as I'm discovering at this point, is not to get my patient to agree with some fabulous insight I have, but for me to figure out what is it that my patient is already seeing or understanding, but they're just not in touch with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I do think that we should aspire to being magicians, I think, shouldn't we? And actually, people are going to get a lot more benefit from what we do if we somehow manage to communicate magicianship in a way. I once, a funny story, my practice got so busy I couldn't cope. It was just too many people to see. And so I had a very nice patient I got on really well with. And I said, I'm really going to have to find a way of scaring people off, I said, I've thought of an idea. I'm going to get a white coat, but I'm going to stick feathers and animal skulls on it. I'm thinking of having a bone put through my nose. And I'm thinking of maybe hanging dried bats on strings from the ceiling. What do you think? And she said, no, you probably get more like that. You probably get more people. And that was a revelation for me, because I thought, oh damn, she's right. In a way, what people want from a healer is somebody who has special powers, and one way of pretending to those would be to dress up as I suggested.
That's funny.
I'm not actually. I'm not really suggesting that we do that, but in a sense, we are magicians. We are alchemists of men. We're not just people delivering products. I hope we're not, anyway. At the high level of the profession, that we're not just taking a symptom and then producing a chemical reflex knee-jerk response to that symptom. Who's going to go deeper? Who's going to go deeper if it's not us?
I can't remember if it was Arthur C. Clarke or Isaac Asimov, one of those great science fiction writers. I can't remember which one it is, but one of them said, any sufficiently advanced technology will be indistinguishable from magic.
I think it was Asimov. Yeah, I think it was Asimov.
Maybe it was Asimov. I know it was one of them. Any sufficiently advanced technology or skill, let's just call it skill, some kind of jishu capacity, indistinguishable from magic. I mean, I wish I'd known as a younger man how to do tongue reading, because I could have avoided some really bad date encounters. Like, oh, bright red tip and really greasy coating. Like, I don't know if I want to get involved with this. But it's simple. Some of it's simple stuff that way, and it's that cultivation of perception that helps so much with that.
Yeah, well, that's what Sun Simiao was doing with his ant. He was deliberately using magic. But you can't copy magic. You've got to have something magical inside your head.
No, you can't copy magic. You can study it. Are you familiar with Milton Erickson? Do you know who Milton Erickson was?
Yes, God, yes.
Same sort of thing.
A genius, really, absolute genius. Yeah, no, I've read his books and studied that, because I realized that not everything could be done just with needles or just with herbs. That I think there's the tradition in the Chinese tradition. There's the concept of what Ted Kaptchuk used to call benevolent deception. Other people call it other things, but there's a tradition, especially from the Jin Yuan dynasties onwards, of physicians realizing that you can't deal with deep-lying grief, for example, just by sticking pins in people or giving them herbs, that you need to unlock something in their heads. And so it was realizing that made me look into things like Milton Erickson and NLP, for example.
We often hear about they say it's the low-level practitioner who treats the physical, and then there's the mid-level practitioner who treats, maybe it's the emotions. I can't remember the quote. And then there's the high level who treats the spirit. I think it's really easy to conflate, oh, well, I treat the spirit as being the highest, I'm the best kind of doctor. But I don't think it's actually like that. I think it's a matter of discerning what is it that this person needs. Because, man, if someone walks in and they got that bad ankle, you got to deal with that ankle pain before they're going to be able to stand up and do everything else they need to do in life.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression from reading that quote originally, and it's a long time since I looked at it, is that the actual word is the low-grade medicine treats the basic thing, dysentery or whatever, that the middle grade, and this goes to connects with the Shen Nung Bun Sao, which classifies herbs into those three categories. And so I'm not sure if it's a correct translation to talk about that referring to physicians, though. Although in other areas of the historical tradition, they do talk about different levels of physicianship to be employed in the court, but really those are instructions to the officers of the court of the emperor in order to talk about who should be recruited. And there's a similar saying in the Nanjing, I think it is, where it says that very, very skilled people should be selected as acupuncturists. People who are very good at talking about stuff should be employed as teachers, as medicine teachers, and people who are very clumsy and break pots should be employed to do massage. And which I think was interesting. So they had a lot of those rules they're not necessarily about textbook medicine. They're about the requirements of an elite court and how a court should be organized.
Yes, and we can think about, at least I think about in my own practice, of what is it that this person needs at this time? Which kind of medicine will be the best fit?
That's exactly what I teach. I say, what's the best thing that can happen to this person right now when they're coming to see me? And that might not be seeing me, that might be seeing somebody else. But I think that practitioners sometimes forget to have that in their heads, and they just assume that everybody who walks through their door is somebody suitable for the tools that they have on offer, which I think is a mistake.
When I was a kid, okay, so this was a while ago,
long time ago.
In middle school, we would take shop class. Back when they still had shop class, you learn to make things. We built bookshelves, and I think I made a fireplace, log turning set, fire pokers and all that. And we got to heat up metal and bend it and hammer it. Right, super fun. I love that stuff. And I remember the teacher would always say, "Right tool for the right job, boys." And I think it's true. I suspect it's true in our medicine as well. Like right tool, right perspective, what's going to fit.
Yeah. Our job is to do the best thing for those people who land on our doorstep.
Absolutely. So I want to come back to something that you mentioned earlier, because back when you were learning it, you weren't thinking about being entrepreneurial and having a job and being able to fill your own rice bowl, for that matter. You were just interested. Did you have anyone in your family who was entrepreneurial or in some ways related to business? Was that in your background in some way, or did you just have to learn the hard way?
No. I just had to learn the hard way. Yeah. I can remember getting a room after graduating, getting a desk, getting the phone put in, getting some business cards, and then sitting at my desk and thinking, oh God, I'm the man who's going to stick needles in people. Why the hell would they come and see me? And in the UK, there's another worry, of course, is that we have a supposedly free healthcare system. So, in a sense, I realized I was competing against a free service. Imagine if you opened a pizza shop and a pizza restaurant, and the government were providing free pizzas to everybody. You'd be worried. So that went through my mind as I started off. And so I just thought, I've just got to be really good. If I'm going to survive at this, I've got to be really good at this. I've got to be better than what is available freely to other people, which is the motivating factor.
You just said a supposedly free medical system. Supposedly free. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's presented by the government as a free. Actually, the word they used comes from 1958. They said free at the point of delivery, which is special politician speak, because the last time I looked, and this was maybe 10 years ago, the average household pays about £5,000, whatever, $6,000, $6,500 per year into the health service in the UK, in taxation and what have you. So it's not really free. We are paying for it quite a lot, really. But I'm not going to get political now.
Yeah, no, I just caught that supposedly. It seemed potent. I think we have a similar thing here. There's in certain states, not the one I live in, but in many states, acupuncture is covered by some insurances, or at least certain kinds are. And there's a big move in the United States right now to get acupuncturists covered under Medicare because, again, let me say it feels like free to the people receiving it. Of course, there's always a cost.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in Britain, it's become evident that when the health service started off in the 1950s, it was driven by a post-war spirit of rebuilding, of everybody pulling together to try and get the country out of the post-war depression and get the economy going again. And of course, that has gradually petered out. But, we live in a contract society. We live in a society where people supply goods and services, and and there's an exchange of money or whatever, that we have a contract contractual bond between people which obliges the provider to live up to the remuneration they're getting. And what the NHS, what the health service in Britain does, is to remove that contract so that the provider has feels beholden to the government and to the National Health Service in London, but the person landing in front of them, there isn't that sense of a contract between them, and I think that hasn't been reflected upon enough in the UK. When somebody comes to me and they're in pain or whatever, and they're handing money over to me, that is a contract. It gives me a contractual obligation to try and live up to that and do my damnedest to get them better. But if you remove that contractual connection between provider and patient, then there's a danger that the relationship doesn't work properly anymore. Okay.
Over here in the States, we call it skin in the game, meaning that when someone opens up their wallet, what goes up, for whatever reason, kind of an obligation, there are consequences if we don't show up and do our best work.
Yeah, and I have to think about my reputation. I need to win with as many people as I possibly can. Anyway, I said I wasn't going to get political, and that's going a bit political.
Yes. Well, I know you don't want to get political, and if I'm verging too far into it, you just shy me off, okay? But I'm wondering, and this is a question that I've got myself in this moment, because look, politics is a little bit, it's a little bit like hot, fiery, rising wood energy. It's not great at the moment. I often find myself tiptoeing or stepping back from conversations because I don't want to accidentally throw kerosene on it. But then I think about my Chinese medicine principles. And it's like, is there a way to take what we've learned as being practitioners, as being pretend or maybe partially practicing Buddhists for that matter, and what you've learned from your patients over the years as a doctor and magician, and like distill out some of that so that we can use the principles of our medicine to actually examine, are men toxic? Are you what you say you are in terms of gender just because you say you are? I don't necessarily want to get into these. I'm just raising these because they're contentious issues. It's not that I want to get into the issue. What I want to get into is there a way to take our medicine as a means of inquiry to help examine these issues?
I think there is, but I think this is too big a question for us to go into at this point. It's no, I'm not sure I can say anything about that. Because in a sense, we'd have to specify what we're talking about. If we're talking, for example, about gender issues or what have you. I think that one lecture that I've done quite a few times, and I did at last year's British Acupuncture Council conference, was a lecture about the very basic issue of yin-yang disharmony and the way that our Shen depends on a closely integrated relationship between yin and yang. And I have, you talked before about, you mentioned Milton Erickson, and his skill was to be able to put people momentarily into a trance without spending half an hour with a watch or something. He could do it with a touch or with his words. He knew that by talking nonsense, for example, he was really skilled at talking gibberish, talking normal, and then suddenly flipping into gibberish. And in doing that, he knew that person would go into a trance for a few seconds, and he would see that they were in a trance, and that he could then implant a suggestion into their mind. And my view was that actually what's happening when he does that is that there's a momentary separation of yin and yang. And when we're at college, we learn yin and yang as being a separation at death. That we do, yin and yang separates at death. But actually, I think that yin and yang can have a relationship where they're totally integrated, a little bit less integrated, on the edge of falling apart, and that actually those we're living in a time where we are immersed in the media, where people, they're very professional, skilled people, are trying to sell us things, where politicians are trying to sell us things, the media are trying to influence everybody, and that they know that you do that with emotional responses. The people know that if you want to sell an idea or a product to somebody, you have to trigger an emotional response. So we now live in a world where we're swimming in professionals influencing our emotional responses all day long, every day, with death, with murder, with bombs and guns and wars and everything. And that those things actually serve to destabilize everybody's yin and yang, and our shen becomes more easily disrupted, and so the underlying the overall problem that I see is that we are living in a time when people are on the verge of yin yang separation, not death, not complete separation, but just being discombobulated. There's a good word, being discombobulated on a regular basis. And I think that leads to a kind of derangement of the Shen. I think we have a Shen disturbance due to yin yang disharmony, due to the environment in the modern world. And that underlies some of the madness, some of the gender issues, some of the things that are being sold to us, and some of the things that we observe in the world is to do with dissolution. And I think if we step back from that and we take on the kind of Yi Jing wisdom, that we just see that as a state of change. That is the state of the current moment and the current era we've moved into. We've moved off from the age of Aquarius, um, the glorious age of Aquarius. I don't know what age we're in now, but it's more of a dissolution age. I'm not an astrologer.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital chi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
No, we did talk about that back in the 60s and 70s. Age of Aquarius, it's all going to get better. Except Aquarius is a really weird, strange sign, as I understand it, my limited understanding. So there's that. I really appreciate your sense here, taking Uncle Milton's thoughts about transinduction. I think it's fascinating, and that we are in some ways really being manipulated every day by people that are experts in, as you were saying, inducing a little bit of a split in yin and yang, because in that kind of trancy, slightly dissociative state, you can slip in all kinds of messages. You can bring in some very therapeutic messages. I mean, you make that ant walk the other way and everything's good, right? Or you can put some other message in that these people over here are XYZ, whichever XYZ you happen to favor. It's really something to think about, and really something to consider, again, with our Chinese medicine thinking, that bringing about some kind of harmony and balance and rooting might be a great place to start with all kinds of issues.
Exactly. Yeah. But I'm not in charge.
Well, except of your own small domain.
except for my full name. So I'll have harmony in my house.
It's a good place to start. Harmony in the house. I think it's a good place to start because, look, if you can't figure out harmony in your house, how the hell are you going to figure it out in your neighborhood? And if you can't figure it out in your neighborhood, like, why should you get along with a different state or a different kind of people or a different country? So house sounds like a great place to start. That sounds powerful. Yeah. Thank you for jumping into that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. I thought we were going to talk about about acupuncture in the 1980s.
Well, we were starting in that direction, and then we got sidetracked.
Yeah, we did.
So, when did you graduate?
Maybe it's too. Yeah, I graduated in 1984 from Van Buren's college, and talking about Ted Kaptchuk before, and his Web That Has No Weaver, that appeared in the middle of my training, really, about 1982, 83, his book. And he also came over to London and started teaching. And what we'd been learning before would now be called Taoist acupuncture. We had stems and branches, we had exams on the I Ching, all the 6 channels, and there was all a mishmash of stuff that nobody could make head nor tail of. And it wasn't very useful in telling us what to actually do in the clinic. And so when we got hold of Ted Kaptchuk's book, it was like a revelation because it was so clear to us. It was confusing to you, but for us, compared with what we'd been learning, it was a revelation because it was so clear. And so we dived into that whole thing, and that's really what Giovanni Macciosia did, and he taught at the college there. But he started teaching TCM, so he was thrown out as a teacher. And then Peter Dedman started teaching TCM in the college there, and he got thrown out for teaching TCM because it was a threat to the guru boss of the college. And then in my time, we had another teacher who was also teaching TCM secretly alongside the actual curriculum. Secretly, yes. Well, she had to do it secretly because she would get thrown out. Because this new fangled, understandable TCM was a threat to the college.
That's really fascinating because now TCM is so often the standard, and people are wanting to go away from TCM. They want to learn stems and branches. They want to learn Taoist, whatever, or I'm using air quotes, classic, whatever that might mean. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's whatever. Yeah, it's a sales thing, isn't it, in many ways?
Did you ever find a way to understand the stems and branches in a way that would help you with, say, point selection or diagnosis in clinic?
In my first year or two, I tried to incorporate it. I wanted to see how much of a difference it made. So I tried to use stems and branches, but I didn't find it had any value. Personally, I didn't find it had any value. I mean, other people could probably make it work better. Maybe they understand it better. So I bought into the TCM tradition, and I was reading the research. I was kind of seeking to validate what I did by reading the research from China, and I searched and searched for any research on stems and branches. I only found one study that claimed that adding stems and branches points to a TCM prescription made it work a bit better, they suggested. So I wanted to I suppose it was a insecurity in a way. I wanted to feel that I was doing the standard thing. I think this is an important question for us, is the trade's description question. What are you going to get when you go and see an acupuncturist? What is it that you're going to get? How do you define what you're going to get? Or is it just whatever that particular practitioner is into, either down to earth or esoteric or whatever? And I think that as a profession, you have to be able to have some delineation, some definition of what a person can expect to get when they walk through your door. And at least, although for all its failings, TCM at least gives some foundation. If every practitioner in the world could do TCM, was capable of doing TCM, even if they do Japanese acupuncture or something else. But at least if we could say that every practitioner is capable of taking a pulse, making a TCM diagnosis and a TCM treatment plan, but then if they're honest, they will say, actually, I can do this. And if you want me to do that, I'll do that. But I prefer to do Japanese style, or I prefer Korean style, or whatever. Then that's, to me, more honesty to have that approach. And I've never seen anybody ask that question. It's just whatever we want to do, we do.
When something doesn't go well, it's pretty easy to get involved. Okay, what happened? But when things go well, we imagine we understand. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I had a teacher who used to say, you can say that you know an herb, or you can say you know a formula when you've used it and it's worked, and you've used it and it hasn't. In both cases, you know the reason why.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I got a list of all these things from my studies. I'd learnt the Shanghan Lun formulas to a level that I could manage at that time. So I'd heard about from the Jingwei Lao Ya Lue the running piglet syndrome. So I was waiting for a running piglet syndrome person to walk through my doors. I got all the TCM patterns as well, and so I was waiting for a heart chi deficiency patient to turn up, and of course. I eventually a running piglet patient did turn up. I think in modern times people have reinterpreted it, but I just had to go on the original description of the sense of piglets running up your abdomen, and I actually had a chap who came and said that. And there's the Daimai syndrome. One of the one of the cardinal symptoms is, of course, the feeling of sitting in water up to the waist. And I actually I waited and waited and waited, and I actually had a patient. And there's almost a glee that happens when the person walks through the door, and you go, "Aha! I know what this is."
Well, I think one of the beauties of being an acupuncturist, you can work the way you want to work.
Yeah. But if you go and see, supposing I wanted to have Western medicine, went to a doctor, went into his rooms, and I said, right, I've got this problem, I want to have some of your medicine, please. And it's supposing if the doctor had his desk covered with all the drugs available, and he produced a pendulum and said, this is the drug I'm going to give you. Okay. Now, would that be ethical? I wanted to have Western medicine, but he's using the drugs, he's using the products of the medicine, but he's using a methodology that is not doesn't really go along with it, and that I think is an ethical issue.
I see where you're getting at here. So first of all, I don't think people go to an acupuncturist because they want acupuncture.
No.
No, I think they go to an acupuncturist because there's something they've got and they want to get rid of it, or there's something that they don't have and they want to get it.
Yeah, and they're hoping this might be it.
Yeah, they're hoping they're going to get it. So, acupuncture is a tool, it's a method. But I also at the same time, I hear your concern that there's a kind of baseline validity or a baseline, maybe I could say competency that practitioners would have, so that, when you say you're an acupuncturist and you meet someone else who says they're an acupuncturist, you can kind of agree that we're working in the same scope, as opposed to extremely different scopes. I mean, I remember, I'll just personalize this. I remember going to acupuncture school 3 years and then going and taking an exam. We had these big national exams, and back in the day, you had to travel to New York or you had to go to San Francisco to take the exam twice a year. That was the only time you could take it. And after the exam, I was sitting out at the pool with a friend. We're getting ready to go to dinner, and I'm listening to this person from another school talking about how much they partied all through school. They hardly read a book, and they got themselves into the dyslexic side of the exam so they'd have more time to complete their exam. And I thought, we're going to have the same license? So I get it that there needs to be some kind of, how do I say it? like a baseline that we can agree on, that there's a certain competency.
Okay, I have a story as well, and okay, sometimes we pick stories to support our own prejudices or to make a point. So this is not everybody, but I remember early on being having a lunch with an acupuncturist, and she said, I always ask if people have trouble remembering what they went to the supermarket for. Oh, I said, why do you ask that? Oh, because that tells me to needle lung 7. And lung 7, I said, oh, explain that to me. She said, well, we translate lung 7 into English, and it's translated by somebody badly as listing deficiency. And Lie Chue, which is not a very good translation anyway of Lie Chue, but that was the way she was working with her acupuncture. That she had a special question: do you have difficulty remembering what you came to the supermarket for? That's when I need to needle lung 7. Well, that how does that connect with anything from the tradition? And this is the problem that we can't somehow politically have a complete free for all. We have to, if we call ourselves a profession, we have to have some boundaries and some limits to what we do.
Yeah. Now you don't really have. I don't think you have licensing in the UK, do you? You need to complete a course of study, but then you're good to go. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we in the 1980s we realized that we needed to create a real profession, and that some people, not particularly me, fought really hard to do that. And we went to government and we said we need to move towards state registration of our profession. And we took them at their word when they kind of took us on board and started to run with it. They made us jump through hoops a lot. I think we looked to America, the burgeoning regulation system in America. We kind of were inspired by that. So we set up accreditation boards for the colleges. We set up a professional register with codes of ethics, with codes of practice, with everything done squeaky clean to put ourselves in a position for state registration. And what we get with British politicians and British civil servants is they'll smile and they'll shake your hand and they'll have meetings, and then they'll kick the discussions into the long grass. So they'll say, "Oh, before we can go any further, you need to do that," and then they present you with something that's going to take 3 years to do it, and then you do that, and you come back and say, "Oh, here we are," and then they're talking to different officials who've got a different set of objections, and so we've had 20 something years 30 years of being frustrated by government objections. And of course, it's really to do with the sheer power of the British National Health Service, because we are threatening to take territory. We're threatening to take a slice of the cake, and if we take a slice of the cake, then we might. What if we're better than they are? It's a threat. If acupuncture works better than physiotherapy a lot, then where does that leave physiotherapists? So we are at some level a threat, and so in a free market for healthcare, as you've kind of got in the US and in Germany and places, then that can be overcome. But here, with a monolithic national socialist kind of health service, then they can use their power to keep us out. So there's lots of acupuncture in hospitals acupuncture techniques being used in hospitals by physiotherapists, but there are virtually no professional acupuncturists working in the health service anywhere. There's maybe 3 or something like that.
That's interesting. I had not considered the influence of a national healthcare system like you've got in keeping you out from licensure, keeping you out from, air quotes here, the system, and how a lack of that here in the United States, I suspect in some ways, has led to our capacity to organize, to license, to get scopes of practice, and to work as licensed professionals because it's a little more, shall we say, free market.
Yeah. Well, in Germany, they have a insurance-led healthcare system as well, with quite a lot of health insurers offering coverage. And in the late 1990s, because Germans love having acupuncture so much, the different insurance companies were competing each other to pay for more and more acupuncture. We will pay for €1,000 a year acupuncture. We will pay 1,500, and they were competing against each other to cover more acupuncture because Germans liked it. Then they got together in somewhere around 1999, 2000, I think it was, and they had a conference together, the insurers, and they said, hang on, we're all competing for more acupuncture coverage against each other. How do we know that's money well spent? Now, in Britain, the British way of thinking is, oh, well, we'll ban it then. We won't pay at all. Whereas the Germans are more clever. The Germans said, okay, we will make reimbursement for people providing acupuncture conditional on them providing data and cooperating in the collection of data on the effectiveness of acupuncture. So they got two universities in Germany and they said, will you oversee these projects? Their aim for the so-called Jurac trials, as it was called, their aim was to have 2 million people, data from 2 million patients, which is what they did. And they compared acupuncture for back pain with physiotherapy and with anti-inflammatory drugs. They looked at different knee arthritis. They looked at migraines. They looked at all sorts of different things. And that's the difference, that they could do that in Germany because they had got a more free market arrangement. Okay, there's lots of downsides to insurance-led as well, but that was very much in contrast to the British approach.
This is interesting, Charlie. This is the first I've heard of the Germans contributing this kind of research. Unlike you, I'm not really a research guy. I got into acupuncture more because, the damn stuff helped me, and okay, I'm in because I know that it changes things. So research hasn't been my thing. I understand it has with you, and thank goodness too, because look, we need all kinds of folks. Again, it's the first time that I've heard that the Germans have done these kinds of studies. What little research I hear about is often from China. How come we don't hear more about German research?
It ran, I think, for about 8 or 10 years, and they published regular updates. In Britain, it was rejected by the authorities because most of it wasn't randomized placebo-controlled trials. If you're paying for patients clinically to have treatment, you can't be randomizing them and giving placebo treatments and what have you. And so that's part of the politics of medicine, is that if some people are sitting in judgment of Chinese medicine with prejudices, then it's useful to have blanket things. You say, oh, well, we don't accept any research that isn't done like a drug trial.
Yes, yeah. Well, I understand the benefit of a double-blinded placebo in certain situations, but certainly for checking into the effectiveness of treatment, why not test whatever drug is considered the gold standard? Look at the results from, 2,000 patients, look at the results from 2,000 patients with, say, acupuncture, and which one has better results? Just compare the two different methods. You don't need a control. You just need to see which dog wins that race.
No, it's political. So, basically, there's a realization happened in the last 5 or 10 years that clinicians aren't making a choice between a placebo and a real treatment. Clinicians and patients aren't making a choice between, well, shall I have a placebo or shall I have a real treatment? They're making a choice between this treatment or that treatment, and they're looking at effectiveness and they're looking at safety. And so we're trying to politically make that point. And certainly, I think in America, I think the NIH are not funding clinical trials that are placebo controlled anymore. I may be simplifying things a little bit, but the NIH have realized that the pragmatic trials that compare different treatments head to head actually have more value in decision making in healthcare. But basically, it's a professional fight, isn't it? And so If there are people who can continue to dismiss our profession on the basis of things that sound plausible, they'll go on doing it, whether it makes sense or not.
Well, this is one of the great things about a free marketplace, that people can choose to do what they want to do. And, the authorities may say one thing, but I'll tell you one thing I've discovered with acupuncture, or at least practicing acupuncture and the patients that I see. People come because it's effective. Bottom line, it's effective. They don't care about research. They care that they don't have back pain. So let's see, you've been in this since, God, the late 70s. At this moment, because you still work, you still treat, and you still teach. I mean, you're still pretty active, aren't you?
I'm winding right down. I'm only doing 2 days a week seeing patients now. And I'm trying to get off because it's falling apart here in Britain, the world of acupuncture as well. With the failure of regulation, government regulation, we get more and more cowboy colleges, more and more cowboy practitioners, and we're not being very effective at fighting our corner. So I'm stepping down really from it all.
You sound concerned for the state of acupuncture in Great Britain.
Oh, yes, yes. The people who were driven, like my generation, are all beginning to retire now, and we've got new generations coming in, and they are not so interested in fighting battles or progressing the profession. They just take it as it is, and then don't appear to be. There's not a lot of concern about the way that things are becoming degraded.
Okay, so you may not want to go down this road, but I'm going to invite you into it anyway. You're welcome not to answer. What were you seeing that they're not seeing? What did your generation see that the new generation maybe is missing?
Okay, we have had organizations set up who are poaching the real practitioners from the properly the regulation system that we set up, and they are using those people to poach more and more people into an organization that is we would consider very much substandard. We have, I don't want to go into too much detail, but we're seeing a decline. And I think that's because the more recent generations of practitioners that have come out of the colleges don't know the history, don't, as you, in a sense, that's what we were going to talk about today, but they don't know the amount of work that was done to create a real profession and to have actual genuine university degrees in Chinese medicine, acupuncture and Chinese medicine. We got into the universities and we persuaded them that this was a real profession. And we've lost that pretty much every university that we had offering degrees in Chinese medicine. I think it was about 10 universities offering degrees in Chinese herbal medicine, acupuncture, and they've pretty much all been closed down. The people who are graduating now don't know what we achieved in the past, and they don't know they can't tell the difference between the real organizations and the fakers.
So it's private schools now that are teaching?
Um, that's right. Yes, I mean Volker, of course, was a professor at Westminster University in London, and they had degrees and master's degrees in Chinese medicine, in acupuncture, and Chinese medicine, and they've all closed. So the field is open for anybody to open a college. There's no regulation. There's no legal regulation, and so in that way, the states you did a lot better really in having state regulation for the states. I know there were downsides to that, but at least there is some control.
Mm-hmm. So the education is not as good as it used to be, is what you're saying.
Oh well, no, we've still got good colleges. We've still got the colleges that have been there since the 80s, offering a good training. But if somebody comes along and opens the college where you can graduate as an acupuncturist in 10 weeks, and it costs 1/10 of the amount that it costs to do the real ones, then they're competing in an unfair way, and they're trading on the ignorance of people. And of course, it's very tempting to do a course that's very cheap and very short, and then you can join the game and you can say so that creates fakery.
Okay, I see what you're saying. There's a lack of clear and consistent standards for what constitutes an acupuncture education.
Yeah, we set up an accreditation board that was squeaky clean. It wasn't just run by acupuncturists. We got professional medical educationalists in, people with PhDs in medical education who weren't acupuncturists. We got them on the board so that it wasn't just acupuncturists hugging each other and agreeing with their friends running colleges. It was a very stringent thing, but it has no teeth. It has no power legally. So anybody can set up their own pretend regulatory body with no particular skills.
I see how that could be a problem.
Yeah, it is a problem.
Isn't it? It's so.
It would be nice to finish on an up note, wouldn't it? Can we not think of a nice thing?
Well, no, we're not. We're certainly not going to leave it on that note. What I did want to say is, look, every generation has its struggles and its challenges. In the time that you were beginning your education, you had the great good fortune to, first of all, be industrious and have a kind of unquenchable curiosity for this thing that came along. But you didn't have much in the way of resources to learn it. You had to really, you had to get lucky. You had to travel to Mumbai and pick up a Monica book. Who knew that's why you went to India, right? You had guys like Benny who helped you out. In this day and age, there's all kinds of material, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are well read, because you got to read it and you got to practice it and put a certain amount of something of your essence into the endeavor.
Yeah, it in a way, too much information cheapens the information. Information was like pearls when I was young. There were no importers of Chinese herbs. There were no wholesale importers of Chinese herbs when I was trying to practice Chinese herbal medicine. So there were a couple of pharmacies in Chinatown, in London, and one in Manchester. And I had to get an introduction to go in there because they were separate from Westerners. And so I went in there and I would buy Chinese herbs off them. And then they've got all these pills, all these Lanzhou patent pills, with just Chinese characters, no English on there at all. And I would just say, oh, give me about 1, 2, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. And I'd go home and get my dictionary out and translate all the characters on the bottles. And then I got lucky on one of them. I bought a bottle of Jingwei Shenqi Wan, and it had got the whole product range. It got a rice paper insert, big rice paper insert with Chinese characters, with all their product range and all the indications, all the actions of those formulas. So I translated all that.
What a treasure. That was a treasure too, wasn't it?
Because, so in a sense, every bit of information had to be hard won, and it didn't just fall into your laps. So that was like being an archaeologist or something. It was the excitement of the time that drove you on to do that. And now there's just like books everywhere, tons of books. Everybody's selling everybody, gurus lined up, and in a way that's good. And there's fabulous resources, but in a way it devalues, it reduces the currency of the tradition in a strange way, because it's too easy. It's too easy to access.
You have to want it and you have to work for it. That rings true for me. I find, and not just acupuncture, not just Chinese medicine. I would say anything in my life that has had any kind of sustainable value, it did not come easy.
No. What I say, or sometimes opening lectures at conferences, I say, well, in the old days, the people had power by having knowledge. People got knowledge and they kept it secret, and they would sell it to people. They would deal it out. And now with the internet, knowledge is cheap, but we have too much of it. We have too much information for people to be able to work with. So now I say that the people with power, the influencers in the profession of Chinese medicine, are the people who can help you navigate through all that information and make it coherent and make sense of it. And I think that's really really true. I think that that without some guidance, without people with experience or with insight being able to guide people through the maze of the tradition, then people will just get lost or just make stuff up. And that's what happened. I did actually consult the I Ching when I was finally making a decision to whether, because I thought, well, maybe I can teach myself. Maybe I don't have to study. Maybe I don't have to spend all that money on learning acupuncture. So I did the I Ching, and it got a moving line that said, "He who hunts in the forest without the forester just loses his way in the forest." And that was a clincher as well. I can't remember which hexagram that's in, but that was, oh dear, I really do have to go and pay money.
Pay money, and beyond the money, because look, anyone can make some money, but you paid with your time. Yeah. Well, Charlie Buck, that seems like a pretty good place to put a pin in it for today. You need a forester. You need a guide.
You need a guide. Yeah, somebody to guide you through the forest. Yeah. That's so important. Hey, that's been great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And maybe we'll just have to have another session to talk about what we were really going to talk about, was the way that the profession developed in the past.
I would say that there is a thread of how it developed, but we took it into the present moment. I think we skipped over a couple of decades, but there's something of my goal with these conversations is to catch something of the essence of that time. And look, we can reminisce, and that can be useful, but I really appreciate your willingness to take some of that energy of that time, more importantly, what you've learned as a practitioner over the years, and speak some to the modern day. So thank you so much for that. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great. You're such a marvelous facilitator on these things. I've listened to you before, and it's great. So I really appreciate you having me.
Do you know what the key is to having a good podcast?
Go on.
Do you know what the key ingredient is to having a good podcast like this? You just get good guests and ask a few questions and shut the hell up. Thanks, Charlie.
It's great speaking to you, Michael. Until the next time. Cheers.
People often talk about acupuncture as being magic, but really, it is simply the application of some principles and methods that lay outside of the worldview of Western science and culture. For a long time now, I've been curious about those extraordinary practitioners who seem to be able to coax a healing response with a story, a precious few well-placed needles, or somehow can see through to the root of an issue without making an issue of it. Sometimes, the frameworks of acupuncture give us what seems like extraordinary skills or perception, but in fact, it is simply the application of a method that others don't understand. How we acquire those methods, that's not something you buy off a shelf. And going through a program, that doesn't guarantee it either. It requires practice and persistence. These days, there are a lot more books and resources for learning than Charlie had. But learning to take what is in those books and bring it alive in your experience, that takes, like what got Charlie started, a whopping dose of curiosity and courage. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.